Hi everyone and welcome to Big Face Robotics. I'm embarking on the creation of a new robot. I've always enjoyed making small wheeled autonomous mobile robots, and I've always been fascinated by the idea of making something that feels or appears to be alive. And I also love the challenge of designing and building moving mobile robots. So I want this to be a differential drive robot with 2 driven wheels and a 3rd caster wheel. Quite a classic design, but that's what I want to go for. I intend to make videos of the design and building process, and I will post a video when I have made sufficient progress on a particular aspect of the project. Before getting started, I have a few design requirements for this robot, just to help define the project and set a few goals. So I've made a note of these design requirements, and they're up on the screen here. And to start with, the robot needs to be relatively inexpensive. I like the idea of making cheap, fairly simple robots and where possible using readily available off-the-shelf electronic components and keeping the custom circuitry down to a minimum. I want the robot to ultimately be autonomous, and I want all of the processing to be done on board. I don't want to have to rely on external devices or connecting to anything to remotely operate the robot. I want it to be autonomous. I may send data to a PC or other device for monitoring purposes, but ultimately I want the robot to be standalone and autonomous. It needs to have enough sensing capabilities to be autonomous and to allow for expansion in the future. I'll cover some of this a bit later on, and I've got some of the sensors in front of me here, and I'll go through that in a bit. I would like the components of the robot to be modular as well, so I can make changes to the configuration of the robot or swap out sensors without having to redesign the whole thing every time I want to do something like that or make a change. I need it to look cool. I recently took a trip to a theme park in Belgium and I was inspired by one of the rides. And it was themed around Victorian engineering and that sort of aesthetic. I imagine this is going to turn a bit steampunk, but I'm okay with that. But I'd like to incorporate some of these design cues into the robot. I've always liked the design of old industrial steam boilers and the like. I also want the robot to have some character and have a way of interacting with a user. So I want the robot to have a face and have some sort of personality, but also have a mechanism where a user can interface with the robot as well. I'm going to jump into talking about the progress I've made in a second, but just to get started, I've gathered most of the required parts together here, the majority of which I had in my bit boxes from previous projects. So just to cover off what I'm going to be using, this may change over time, but at the moment I plan to use an ESP32 microcontroller. I'll be using these ubiquitous yellow motor gearboxes. They're low cost, they're readily available, and with some modifications or some additional gearing, they'll be more than suitable for this robot. I've fitted some motor encoders to these gearboxes already from a previous project, and I'll be covering that in a future video. So I've got a motor driver, I've got batteries, I've got voltage regulators, power switches, all ready for this project. I've got some distance sensors and a compass module, so I can add sensing capability to the robot. So I also have a TFT screen that will become the robot's face and user interface. And I've got a slightly larger screen here, which I'll explain later in the video. So I'm in a position to make a start on this robot. I'm going to approach this slightly differently to what I would normally do. So I'd usually start by jumping into 3D CAD modelling and 3D printing the mechanical components for the robot. But I think I'm going to start with the electronics on this project to try and get everything talking to the ESP32 and working together on the bench, and this will be the nervous system of the robot. And to kick this off, I really want to start playing with these TFT screens and getting some custom graphics displaying in the form of a robot face and some gauges to display data. The other thing I'd like to test, which I haven't used before, is the touch input on the ESP32 as a way for a user to interact and input to the robot. So I'm going to try and get that covered in this video as well. So it's always good to have a goal, and the aim by the end of this video is to get the screens working and the touch input working to the ESP32. So to get started, the first job was to get the screen wired up to the ESP32, get the libraries installed on the Arduino IDE, and run some of the test programs to make sure the screen is working as expected. So to start, I purchased a 1.8 inch 128 by 160 TFT screen module, and this was based on the ST7735 driver to test getting the ESP32 connected to a screen and displaying some test program graphics and some custom graphics as well. The connections I was using between the ESP32 and the screen are shown here. So the library I'm using is the TFT ESPI library. I've not used this previously, so there will be some learning required to figure out how to get this working and how to use it for the custom displays that I want to design. But to get started, I'll get this installed via the Arduino IDE. So for this library, the first step is to configure the user setup.h file for the specific screen that you are using. This file can be found in the TFT ESPI library folder where you've installed it on your machine. In this case, I'm using a screen with the ST7735 driver, and I've set up the file for the specific I/O pins that I am using. I have a display with a green tab on the screen, and you can set this up within this user setup file as well. So with the screen connected and the configuration file modified, I can now select and upload a test program to the ESP32 and see if the screen is working as expected. The test programs all work. I had a couple of other settings to change in the setup file because I had some artifacts and bordering around the image, but with those set up, everything was displaying as you'd expect. One particular test I wanted to run was displaying JPEG images onto the screen, and particular custom JPEG images. So I made an image in Inkscape and I converted it to a JPEG image, and then this needed to be converted to a byte array and added to the test program. So I'd like the display to show an eye or a pair of eyes that match the style of the robot, so the Victorian aesthetic. And I'm early in the process, there's still lots of work to do, but this proves the principle of displaying custom JPEG images and right into the screen. So this particular TFT screen works as expected, but I'm starting to think it might be a bit too small for this project. If it's going to be the face of a robot, it needs to be visible from a bit further away. So I decided to get hold of a larger screen, a 2.4 inch 240 by 320 pixel screen to test as well. I will later decide which one is most appropriate for this robot, but it's likely to be the larger screen after having a look at it. The larger screen uses a different driver. It's an ILI9341, and I believe this and the driver for the other screen are probably the most common drivers that you'll find. I connected this screen to the ESP32 using the same pins as the smaller screen, updated the user setup file, and uploaded a test program to the ESP32. The only real difference in the wiring is that the larger screen is missing the chip select connection. From my understanding, this is only an issue if you plan to use multiple screens, which I don't, so not too much of a problem. It works just fine for one screen, as seen here. So the TFT ESPI library works great and has many example programs to allow for testing and showing the various ways to display images and text on TFT screens. This is the easy bit done. Now I want to program some more custom graphics to give my robot a face. I want to start really simple and just create a couple of moving eyes and test displaying some data on the screen as text. I'll develop this further in the future as the project develops, but I just want to have a play and get something simple working for now. So here it is. I've programmed a custom display to show a simple pair of moving eyes with a basic background. This is just a test, and there will be plenty of work to do in the future on the custom displays. While I was working on this, I've also programmed another screen to act as a custom gauge or a window to display data. I've also got a capacitive touch input working by building on the examples found within the Arduino IDE. I'm using interrupts to detect and count the number of touches on the input pin and displaying this on the screen as a counter. So I've managed to get the screen up and running and a user input working via a capacitive touch pin. Nothing groundbreaking, but this is a start to the project. I would like to get all of the electronic components tested individually and then start connecting them and working together as they would be for the finished robot. Alongside this, I will also begin designing the mechanical components of the robot ready for 3D printing and fabrication. So next time I will start looking at the distance sensors and the compass module, get them connected and tested, and ensure that I can get these working alongside the already working screen and touch input. That's going to be it for this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel to follow along with the progress of this project. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.